Welcome to Confessions of a CEO powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury and I'm delighted today to have Paul Cheetham-Karcz on my podcast. For those of you who've not had the pleasure of meeting Paul, Paul is not only the founder and CEO of Sedulo, which is a privately owned national independent accounting/advisory business, but he's also an investor and businessman and has set up and invested in many businesses across the country, across a variety of sectors. Paul is someone who strives for perfection. He's never willing to be content, always looking to better himself and the individuals that he has the pleasure of being in business with. And as a consequence, I think he's going to have some really interesting insights and perspectives to share with us on this podcast today. Paul, can I just start by thanking you massively for agreeing to appear on my Confessions of a CEO podcast?
Thanks for having me on.
Honestly, I've known you probably now on off for about 6-7 years. And whilst we've started to do a little bit of business together, I actually haven't really ever gotten the opportunity to get to know you on a personal note. So I'm genuinely thrilled to be able to spend an hour with you today.
Good. I'll see how it goes.
Indeed.
You might not say that at the end, but
Well, hey, you know, where there is a will, there is a way.
there you go.
So it would be brilliant, Paul, given you aren't from the Northeast. It would be good if we could just go right back to talk a little bit about your sort of early education, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. So I grew up very working class. Was in a single parent, so mum worked 2 jobs. And I spent a lot of time with grandparents. And they did, I was born in 78, so in the early 80s, where I grew up, Stockport in Manchester, most grandparents in working class run council estates in them days. So that's where I grew up. I went to a normal school. I think there was 200 odd in our year, 210 I think, and maybe 5 of us went to higher education.
Wow.
It kind of gives you an idea of the level of expectation, right?
It does.
And I don't know what it was, but sport was big, so maybe we'll come on to that in a bit through the leadership club and that I do. So I was always competitive, and when I got to probably GCSEs and they realised that I was going to get decent GCSEs, really the holy grail really for everyone then was try and get a job. It wasn't about higher education. The careers teacher back then was saying, we've got opportunities. There's a car mechanics garage down the road.
Right.
It's a pretty good one if you can go on work experience there, which she sent me to. You can get a job, but not only that, if you get that job in that car mechanics garage, you'll get it for life. And that was the goal. The goal of me and all my mates was get a job, any job, and get that for the rest of your life, and that will be winning. So that's the starting position which I always reflect on. And I don't mind saying just very quickly, first day, I'm 15, I turn up on my work experience, I've got the overalls on, I'm feeling all manly and gritty at the age of 15 in my rugger boots. And it was probably the best work experience I ever had because they paired me with a guy, and I forget his name now. I owe him a great debt of gratitude because he spent the whole of my 2 weeks whinging and moaning and whining, number one. And more importantly, and I remember it, wishing the day away. We counted down till the bacon sandwich at 10:30. After bacon butty time, we counted down to 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, we counted down till 5 o'clock on a Monday. And on a Monday, it was job done, lads. Day 1 down, 4 days to go. It was literally a countdown. So if ever there was a life experience, not even work experience, that I could put a lot of my determination down to, it would be that 2 weeks, because what it told me is what I didn't want to do, not what I wanted to do. So that was my education. So there was very few of us, that handful of us out of the 200 odd, that went on to do some further studies, and I did A-levels. I wanted to be a teacher back then, so I did my A-levels. Then I did a sports science degree initially, and then...
At which university, Paul?
I went to Staffordshire. It was the closest to home. Oh. So I was quite, say, grown up for my age. Truth of the matter is I didn't enjoy uni. I wasn't into being around... I prefer to be around elders, if I'm honest with you, back to grandparent days, and even today. If I'm learning off people, they tend to be longer in the tooth than me, grey haired than me.
Yeah.
Might actually be a weakness of mine, to be honest with you, but I tend to get my learnings from elders, wise, what I consider wiser people. And so, yeah, back then I was going to be a teacher. I remember them giving me the structure of what you could earn as a teacher, and that was the put off again. It was, hold on a minute here, there's another structure that then pushing me into here. It was get a job, and it was, all along the way in the early days, I found the place I was from was you need to conform to a structure that we're going to put you in from where you've come from. And when I look back on that, it annoys me actually. And my foundation, we might talk a bit about later, is about making sure people maximise their potential, creating equality and opportunity. And that drives me really today. And on the back of, I could have been a mechanic. And by the way, I'm not going to go mechanics. If you love cars, you want to be the best mechanic in the world.
Totally.
Why not? But I don't like cars even today. I didn't like them then. It's not my skill set. I can change a light bulb at best in my house. That's how handy I am with my hands. And yet, here school was trying to almost cajole me and push me down into a career path that I had no interest in, and I'm pretty crap at.
Yeah.
Right? So that gives you a bit of an insight, I think, into what schooling was like. Then I did my sport degree. Back then, sports science was pretty new because I think 78, so what was that, 99 I left. So there wasn't as much. It was fairly new. And then I ended up stumbling on becoming an accountant straight from there. So that was the first sort of 21, 24 years. And I wanted that accountancy be really just to give me back then some guidance. I always need some routine. I need a purpose. I need structure. Framework. Yeah. And so that was a great sort of 3-year post degree qualification that maintained some structure in my life when I needed it.
Just to sort of go back to school, Paul, for a second. Obviously, you mentioned that in your school there were very few people who went on to further education. It seems a lot of people were encouraged to go into employment or maybe vocational training of some sort, like an apprenticeship. What do you think it was that created in your mind not only the belief that there was something bigger for you, but give you the sort of motivation to not conform, to not just do what everybody before you had just done?
There's a rebellious streak,
okay,
for a start. We might get a bit deeper in a bit about why I'm so driven. I don't mind sharing that story in a bit. Winning, competition, validation that you get from winning and competition as a kid is quite important in that. And I don't know where the rebellious part came, but I always remember, I always felt like I thought differently, not better, but certainly different. When my dad that brought me up, he was a lorry driver. I used to spend all the 6-week holidays with him just driving around the country. And there's not a lot to do when you've spent 9 hours in a truck, right? So I asked him question after question after question, are you bored? And I always remember, he was a big boxing fan. And I always remember when he'd talk about Las Vegas, and the way he would talk about that was as if it was another planet.
Right. Okay.
I used to consider, why does he talk about things or places as if, this is as an 8 or 9-year-old, by the way, I'd always wonder why he talked about things if they were unachievable or
unattainable. So beyond his reach, in his opinion.
I remember on our street one time, there was Knight Rider. You're the same old age as me, roughly. Knight Rider was on TV. Kit was the car. And they kind of brought out, I think it was like a Toyota something or other. That was a bit of a model on the car in Knight Rider. And I remember my dad looking at it on the road like aliens had landed, right? And I used to just think, I don't understand. I'm going to own that car. I'm going to go to Las Vegas. All the things that I used to think used to hold him back. As a kid, I used to think, and I don't know why, but I used to think that's not holding me back. And I'm going to get all the things that was alien.
But where do you think that comes from? Because often at a young age, you become the people you spend most of your time with. So the belief system that often kids have is imposed on them by their parents. So how do you think you saw things that your non-biological father couldn't see? He was giving you that perspective.
There was nobody giving me that.
Wow.
But that was innate. But when I look back at my earliest memory, is pretty grim. I won't go into the exact details, but it was my second birthday and my biological father leaving, right? And it was a bit chaotic, but that was the situation. And then there was a period of 2 till 4 in my life where there would be consistent rejection. Because what would happen is mum was now doing 2 jobs, grandparents were looking after us, weekends was go to see your dad. And 1983, 1981, 1982 would always be get to his house, he would say no, and we'd end up back at home. And so there was a period from 2 till 5 that was pretty chaotic as a childhood. You wouldn't want to put kids through that really, and it certainly made who I was. I've seen a lot of things probably shouldn't have. Got a lot of rejection, and therefore, coming back to what I said before, sport became my validation. Winning became my validation. And so the more I won, I mean, I used to cry my eyes out when we lost, even at the age of 13. If we lost a football game, I'd be crying. I couldn't bear losing. It was a rejection. And so whilst I don't quite know why I became rebellious, if that is the right word, what I definitely became is super driven, supercharged, and more validation I got through sport as a kid, it made me want to do that in the outer world. And the channel couldn't be sport because I wasn't good enough.
Well, maybe you'd seen a set of circumstances that you didn't like, and you were trying to strive for something more than that.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, being on the right side of the line led you to feel like you were distancing yourself from perhaps the upbringing that you were exposed to.
And we had no money, 0 money. We used to have potato rash every single night. My mum used to make it on a Sunday, and we warmed it up 6-7 nights a week. That was the only thing we ate. So I just knew in my stomach I wasn't going to live like that, and I knew that as a kid.
Understand. And obviously, you've talked a little bit about your relationship with your non-biological father. Do you keep in touch with your biological father now?
No.
So did you see him last when you were 2?
2 bits and bobs till about 5. Then my dad came into my life. Then we had a normal upbringing. We had security, we had love, we had stability, the things you want as a kid, really. Or not even as a kid, the things you want in life. So from the age of 5, I've got no complaints. And I'm very close with my dad. And biologically, no, he reached out to me a few years ago and I just ignored it. Then that boat has sailed, it's done, it's gone. I'm fine with it. And no, there's no need for me to go back there. There's no need for me to go back.
So presumably your belief is, as a young person, actually it's not just about nurture, it is about nature?
100%. 100%.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about sort of university days. So you stayed close to home. Did you not have the itch to scratch when it came to moving away, living in halls, doing all of the things?
It was a means to an end.
Okay, so you went to university for the degree, not for the lifestyle.
I was not interested. I used to drive in, do my course, drive home.
Okay.
Drive in, do my course, drive home. Get my degree. What's next? Next. Teacher, PGCE. Decided when I seen the pay structure. Just the structure, not so much the pay. It was more than any of my family have ever been
It's
on.
the rigidity of structure.
Yeah, I thought, no, we're not having a limit on my potential. By the way, I'm 21, I don't know what that is.
Yes.
So I think it's 30 odd grand a year you could get paid then after about 10 years of being a teacher. And that was a lot of money in my household. But I just thought, I'll take my chances. I want to understand what I'm truly capable of.
Okay. Obviously, you've sort of kindly, Paul, shared the fact that certainly from 0 to 5, there was no stability in the family household, if you like.
Yeah.
And from 5 onwards, whilst you had, parents who loved you and wanted the best for you, perhaps because of the careers they had, they weren't able to give you some of the finer things in life.
Yeah.
Just talk to me sort of a little bit about how you felt when you were striving for more, but actually fundamentally you had little, because that can often be difficult for someone, because to achieve great things, you have to visualize what having great things feels like, don't you?
Yeah.
The law of attraction is all about believing that you can achieve everything.
Yeah.
How do you do that when you look at what you've got and you have little?
Yeah, but I think, and the thing I've realised, it's definitely not about getting things. So in the early days, whilst there was an immature striving, there's nothing that I've ever got tangibly and materially that I've been grateful for. And actually, I put myself in a position where we're always striving for more because we have to. So if I make money, I invest it in something. We don't sit on huge balance sheets. Don't want to. It's not the environment I live in. I like to live in an environment of strive and pressure. That was the environment I grew up in.
Yeah.
So could I sell my business today for a few quid? Yes. Would I ever have to work ever again? No. Am I constantly pushing to ride the edge of the wave? Yes. And the only way you can do that is if that's the environment you create. It's a bit like the old boxing scenario of it's hard getting out of bed at 5 a.m. in the morning in silk pajamas. I think it was Marvin Hagler and Mike Tyson copied it, right?
Correct.
So the key is don't buy the silk pajamas, right? So my missus said to me not long ago, we just bought a new house because the kids, I've got to give some give back to my family actually, who have to put up with a lot. But she's sat there about a year ago and said, Paul, we're in the same house and the same car as when I met you 13 years ago. And your business is maybe 100 times the size of what it was when I met you. And you're still driving the same car and we're still in the same house. And I think there's an element of wanting to maintain that environment of strive. And I've seen that in other entrepreneurs. It's that, and you have to create that. You can't bank a load of cash and be completely stable and financially free, and then have the absolute determination and drive to stay in an environment of strive. It's all silk pajama.
Yeah.
Example.
There's a few things you've said in there, Paul, that we've definitely got to unpack. And I'm going to ask one direct question now, but we'll come back to it, if you don't mind, a little later in the podcast. But
Yes.
You've talked there about never being content and never wanting to be content, because I think perhaps you believe that when you are content, you don't strive nor thrive. Is that how you view things?
Yeah.
So does that mean you'll always be sort of striving for something more, i.e. you'll never just acknowledge that perhaps you've achieved great things and therefore should stop? Is that what that means?
I think I'm 46, 47 next, and the question you just asked me, I've been asking myself probably for the last 20 years.
Yes.
And if you look at the first 15 of them 20 years, that was a real, the actual answer to your question was a real issue to me. Because the answer to the question is, I'll never be content.
Yes, totally.
And if you're not careful and you want to conform, then you're told that that's what you should attain and want to achieve, right? Contentment. We're all looking for it, or are we? So I think for 15 of them 20 years, I would suffer from anxiety, unhappiness, and other negative thought processes on the back of, strangely, for a non-conformist, not conforming, i.e. not being happy with myself, that I'm not content with what I've achieved. I'm wondering what's it all for then? We all have these 3 AM conversations. What we're doing it for?
Think time. That's right.
Why are we doing it? And I think it's only in the last few years I've become really content with the idea that I don't want to live in an environment of being content. And the amount of people that say, even today, my dad, 82, my mum must be 70. When are you going to slow down? Why do I want to slow down? I have friends that watch me. When are you going to slow down? Why are you doing another city? Why are you doing another office? Why not? And again, we talk about who you surround yourself with, what you surround yourself in. Well, I don't put myself in structures that limit my creativity, my thought processes, or my potential. I don't put myself around people who do the same.
Yep.
If you inherit them, because the friends and the family and so on, it's fine. I'm just very careful I don't take advice from them.
Okay.
So I don't take advice from my mum. I once bought a house in Spain, quite risky, in COVID, off a mobile phone video, right?
You've got an interesting definition of quite risky, but again, we'll put that on a little later.
So I'd not seen it, never been, I had to buy it the next day.
There you are.
Didn't really have the money for it. Ended up buying it. Rang my mum. Mum, what do you think of this? 10 minutes, I'm in the car on the intercom thing, and all I'm doing is I'm looking all the time at like where mum on call, and all I can think is, why are you doing this, Paul? Why do you always put yourself through this? Why all the questions. After about 8 minutes, I went, do you know what, Mum, I'm going. And she was like, all right, mid-sentence. I said, do you know what I've realised about this is, you just give me 20 reasons why not to do it, and there's no balanced view here of why I could or should possibly do it. So on that basis, I'm just not going to come to you for any advice.
So question to interrupt you, but
Go.
Why do you still seek validation from your mum then? Because you probably know you're not going to get the answer you're looking for, but you still look for the answer.
And that was COVID, right? 2020 or whatever year that was.
Why do you think then you did want her to say, Paul, great idea, go buy that property you've never seen? Why did you want
I just think even when you're out on your own as a business owner, and regardless of the amount of people around you, and you just can't do it without them, there are times where it's lonely because a shit hit the fan.
That's right.
Everybody else and some are so close to the founder in being the person whose name or head's on the chopping block, but they're just not quite there. Right. So it's lonely. So you always want that kind of, am I doing the right thing? The validation of, but in reality, you're going to make the call regardless of it, truthfully. That's why you're a founder or an entrepreneur. You're going to go with your gut feel. I mean, I'm an accountant, but I will go with my gut feel over the numbers every day of the week. I will go with a vision in my head over a business plan every day of the week. I would meet a person and go with them over their idea every day of the week. It's that innate thing. But we all want a team around us that we can bounce things off. The thing is if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to change rooms. If you don't surround yourself with people who either want to promote you or can, most don't want to promote you, most can't, even if they want to. My mum wants to, but she doesn't understand the vision I have for self-improvement balanced with risk and living on the edge. So she can't possibly give me the advice, and that's fine. If I want the advice on my kids, she's been there and done it, so I'm going to go to her advice on my kids. If I want advice on whether I should take a risk, I need to speak to another fellow entrepreneur who's used to risk-taking.
Totally. So obviously you've described yourself as someone who doesn't conform, doesn't like structure, likes to take pretty hairy risks. Talk to me about why you decided to be an accountant, because I wouldn't describe an accountant in any of those ways.
It's true.
So talk to me about your career choice. What led you to
Well, I
become
didn't know what the truth is, I didn't know what an accounnt was when I became an accountant.
Thank God, otherwise I suspect you may not have pursued the career choice.
Well, I needed structure, the framework at early years, so I fell lucky with the job. What was so I went on an accountancy training course, but there was a load of problems in the business that I went in, because I didn't work in practice, I worked in an industry, and it was the debt management industry in the late 90s, which was a new industry, which meant there was a lot of high-flying businesses, and I worked in one of them. But every time, at the age of 21, every time there was a problem, the owner would get me in to solve the problem at the age of 21. So the first two quick memories on that, because they're quite important actually, but the first one was, I worked in the internal audit function at the start, and they was trying to get ISO 9002 to get more credibility in the debt management field. So I worked in an internal audit team of about 15 from memory. And they said, here's a piece of work, Monday morning, Paul, hand it in on Friday before you go. No problem. So I get in, start the piece of work, and I start to think, it's getting to about 5 o'clock. I think, I'm almost through this work. So I just stayed and stayed and stayed. I stayed till, say, 9 o'clock at night and finished the piece of work. I handed it in the morning. When I handed it in to my boss, he was like, what's this? And I was like, that's the piece of work you've asked me to do. Here's the report on a certain department. And he was like, you don't have to have it in until Friday. And I was like, yeah, but I just got into the flow, midday, I had to stay late. But so what? Here it is. Can I have my next piece of work? So he gave me the next piece of work, and I did the same thing the next day. And on the Wednesday, he said to me, what's this? And I said, it's done. And what's the feedback on the one on Monday? And he said, the one on Monday was exactly what we're looking for. And now you've handed him in the second one. And he was like, had a puzzled face on him. And I was like, yeah, can you give me the third one? And he's like, you have to stop doing this. I was like, stop doing what? And he was like, everybody else hasn't handed a piece in yet because they've been told they're going to do it on the Friday. And I was like, so what? Like, just give me one a day. And he was like, you can't do one a day because you're pissing everybody else off.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh, maybe this accountancy thing that I'm doing, because maybe there's an opportunity here to be the best. Now, I was the only one with a sports science degree. The other 14 had economics degrees. They had better degrees.
Yeah, more relevant degrees
relevant
to the accounting qualification.
So I realised pretty quickly that I was in a pretty slow-moving industry within a week, within 2 days. And I thought, here's the opportunity. If I had this work ethic, right, and around back then, it's a bit different now because it wasn't Dragon's Den. It wasn't cool to be a business owner.
Right, okay. Yeah.
It's cool now.
It is.
Isn't it?
It is.
Right. It wasn't cool then. In fact, if your dad didn't own a business then, you couldn't really start a business. Every business was Summit & Sons. It was the back end of that, wasn't it?
Right, yeah.
It's not like now where you can start anything from your bedroom with an idea, which is great. So what if you wasn't going to start your business, mum and dad in the sort of middle England would have gone, can you be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant? No. And what I found is most people in my industry back then, they didn't want to do any, but they had to pick one.
Right.
So they didn't have the same intensity that I had, and therefore they didn't get through the workflow that I did. And I thought, there's the opportunity. And the second part, quite quickly, was he put me in a project to clear the post room. And I won't go into that, and it's a shame. If we had longer, I would go into it because it's the biggest learning I ever had. Right, at the age of 21, I went into what was a department that was a complete mess. Had 20 members of staff who were called the numpties in the organisation. And I managed to turn them around within about 6 to 8 weeks from effectively what they was doing was getting the mail in a day and sending it around various places in the business. But there was millions of pieces of mail a day coming in on people's individual personal debt. So you can't get that wrong. But this business had moved quick and had got it wrong. And they'd employed these people who called themselves the numpties. And I went through a 6 to 8 week process where I put certain things in place that day or that 2 months that I put in any business that I go in today. In many ways, when you watch Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, you watch 3 episodes and then you watch every episode after that, and it's the same thing,
Yes.
different name on the
Of
restaurant.
course it is. Spot on.
That learning was done then.
And a quick question on that. Was that focused on systems, processes and procedures, or are you saying you actually just encouraged people to view their job and their contribution differently? Because those are quite separate things.
A series of things,
Yep.
but in the main, by far, the second one you've just said.
And I thought that's what you were getting at.
It was getting people to have self-respect, ambition, fulfill their potential, and provide them with a platform that allowed them to do that. And on the back of that, the job got done. We put in better processes, but that wasn't the thing that drove it. It was people doing 10 times the work after week 8 that they were doing the first week that I went in. Same people.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people focus on process, procedure, instruction manual, but the reality is if the attitude of the person using that instruction manual or following those procedures isn't positive,
Yeah.
it falls down.
Always.
Without doubt. So attitude first, in my opinion, process, procedures second.
Always.
Okay. So obviously that was your sort of introduction to accounting, but from an industry perspective. And for the benefit of our viewers now, of course, you are CEO of Sedulo, which is a national full-service advisory business. So given the limited time we've got, could you just talk me through how you went from being an ambitious, frustrated accountant in industry to running your own large, national, independent advisory business?
Yeah. So really quickly then, 3 or 4 years in industry, which you need a different type of emotional intelligence
Agree.
for.
Absolutely agree.
I then went to work in a practice, for anybody knows, you're not working with a business owner there. You might be, but you're working with multiple. And a lot of it, particularly then, was complaint-based. So I went from making and having an impact of some degree on that business to what I felt like was having very little. It was audit, it was accounts, it was filing your accounts, doing
Almost like year-end procedures.
procedures.
Always looking at historical information, which is all news for the business owner, right?
Exactly.
Got it.
And most of the business owners we were working with back then, they were only interested in you doing that piece of task, to get regulation fulfilled. The company's house
to some degree.
So I did 3 or 4 years of that, and I didn't like that at all. You get a broader knowledge, by the way, technical. So you kind of got emotional intelligence is better, if you ask me, in industry, but the technical part is better in practice. So, and then I decided I wanted to put the two together. So after 4 years in industry, 4 years in practice, I set up my own business, which is Sedulo today. And I set it up in the early days to do exactly what I just said, which was have an impact on businesses and organisations, but do it for multiple. So I didn't want to get a job. I didn't want one. Anyway, so that was a kick-off. And we had a very quick win in the digital marketing space. 2 brothers came in, and they were small business, $250,000 turnover. Within about 3, 4, 5 months, I'd given them some just ideas. You've got to be brave and courageous, and a lot of people don't want to do that. And I care. So it gives me a pass to be brutally honest with clients. And that's what I'm looking for in everybody else that I work with. It's that ballsiness to say, I think you should, not why is your stationery gone up £2,000 this year or this month. They're not the questions to ask. The questions are to get quite deep. If you can get into and understand the kind of clients you're working with and you have deep, meaningful relationships where you care, then you can almost say whatever you want to them because they know it's position of care.
Point you've made there, Paul, is really fascinating, actually. And I've recently seen this from the perspective of giving feedback to people. But it's the same thing, whether it's feedback, it's advice. Fundamentally, unless you care and the person believes you have only their best interest at heart, no one takes feedback well. No one takes advice well. They push back. But of course, if the person you are giving advice to knows that your absolute focus is them, they'd want it. They'd soak it up, right? Because why would they not?
Exactly.
If they know, though, that you care. How do you, as someone who's too busy and has many clients, hundreds of staff, how do you genuinely go about caring? Because you can't care for everyone all of the time. It's just impossible. So how do you actually do that in a practice?
Well, the first part as a practitioner, right, which I do less of now, but people still have an inroad into me, right? So I still have clients. I clear emails, 400 emails a day, and I clear them all down before I go to bed at night. I clear every voicemail, every missed call, every day. But more than that, what you're trying to do is drive that culture through an organisation. But by the way, in our organisation, everybody is 250 staff now, but they all have a direct into me because every week they have to send me their level of staff happiness. Every week with a comment. So every week on a Friday, I get 250 people's staff happiness with a comment, and I read every one of them. And if anybody's under a certain amount or they put a comment I feel, I reach out to them Friday afternoon. So that's my Friday afternoon from 3 o'clock. So we clear the week down by understanding what's going on in the organisation. Because what you're trying to get is a culture of an organisation, of course. I think that's the most important thing in any business, is the culture of the organisation. Coming back to people will always be better than processes. So it is a constant frustration when you see that slipping, and it is a constant demand to hold the standard that you expect in the organisation, to drive the same level of repeat behaviours that I would do for a servicing a client. That's it. That's what you do. And you have to be relentless. And you have to have difficult conversations. And you have to be willing to take feedback. And you have to employ and work with people who want to take feedback. And if they don't, you don't work with them because it's pointless, because feedback's a gift. If you look at athletes, and you know that a lot of my mindset comes from sport. I know I work with a lot of athletes and sporting elite people, and they just love feedback, right? If you want to win a world record at 100 meters, you're not miffed when your coach tells you, your left leg's lagging. It's like feedback's a gift. And I think that kind of principle in the workplace we adopt, but it's not for everyone.
It's not. And you'll have many examples of individuals who technically are good, but they've not been receptive to feedback. They've been defensive, unwilling to accept that they aren't perfect. How do you deal with that person? On the assumption that, of course, you want the person to try and develop, right?
Yeah.
So if someone needs to receive feedback but doesn't listen to the feedback given, any tips as to how you can encourage them to be a bit more open-minded and receptive?
It really depends the most important thing about feedback, and I haven't mastered this, by the way, but I'm aware of it, is how you deliver the feedback, right? So some people want brutal, honest feedback. They almost get a kick out of the truth and it spurs them on. There's others that will crumble if you give them feedback in that same way. It comes back to, again, and I'm not saying I'm perfect at this, by the way, but it comes back to the level of relationship you have with the individual. So whether it's a client or the member of the team, the deeper the level, which is why I'm not a work from home fan, the deeper the level of relationship you've got with the person you're giving the feedback to, the more they're going to listen and maybe be willing to accept it.
Totally.
And I don't think you build that level of relationship up from your kitchen and somebody's bedroom.
So what's your firm's policy then on sort of flexible working? Because of course right now that's sort of hot topic, right? And I think people are too afraid to be honest about what they require from their employees. So Dulo, what is the policy?
So our policy was to get everybody back straight away.
Full time?
We gave them 1 day a week work from home.
Okay.
And that wasn't met well. By the way, when it was COVID was going around, we wasn't stupid, if you were 63 years old, you got a 65-year-old husband, but forget all that, take all
Totally.
the health side out of it.
Absolutely, Paul.
It was, we're getting back to work as soon as we can. And that was at a time where banks, for example, and other people in professional services were saying, come back to work 1 day a week.
Right, the opposite.
We were saying completely the opposite. And we had a fallout. Staff turnover 2021, 2022 is about 45%.
Wow. Versus the year prior?
18.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So people's mind had changed about work, and that's fine for them. But we didn't change our philosophy. We was under attack from internally from our staff. But it comes back to a belief system. We stuck to what we believed in. And I always believed we'd get back to what was pre-COVID. And I still believe that today. In fact, it was only last week Trump's got everybody back into the office in the whole of the US government. So I always believed we'd come back. And I also believed it was a bit of a cheap trick, I think, by some employers to go, we never made as much money as we did then. If I've got 200 staff and they put 500 quid a month expenses in, it's 100 grand. That's right. It's right on the bottom line every month.
That's right.
It's nice work if you can get it. But I think to deliver high performance, you need to have deep connection. And you get deep connection by having face-to-face. If we did this podcast now, it'd be better now than if I was at home
without doubt.
and you was at your
Which is
home.
why I would never do this podcast remotely, for the reasons you're getting at.
I did it in COVID a few times when you had no option, when I hosted mine.
Yes.
And it just isn't the same.
It's not the same.
And so you need deep connection. And also, I think, so our work from home policy is 4-1. If it was up to me, I wouldn't do the 1. I'm going with a management team there to give a little bit of flexibility.
Just to ask why are you doing that? Because, of course, it's quite clear you have very precise views on your business, the business you set up. So why are you sort of showing that level of flexibility? Because you're always compromising, which goes against the grain, right?
Yeah.
You're conforming, Paul, dare I say.
Agreed. But the thing is I think there is points, and I'll be brutally honest here, in a leadership style that I rule with an iron fist. And then there are times where you have to give. You have to give because otherwise you don't get trust. You know, if the rest of my management team are saying they really need 4-1 to high perform, I either listen to them or I don't. I don't always listen to them and do what they say.
No, of
but
course.
you've got to sometimes, otherwise you're a dictator and you don't build a level of trust in relationships where you listen to everyone and then just do what you think's right anyway. So there's an element of, I won't say it's a game, not sure the correct phraseology is, but I will back down on certain things even when I disagree, because you have to show in teams that trust is built.
Well, it's compromise.
Yeah.
And life's all about that, right?
There you go.
It's never your way. It has to be compromise.
And that is a balance, because I think people compromise too much, right? Because they want to be liked. Right? The biggest problem I think with management is they don't like confrontation and they don't like to give feedback where it's critical feedback because they're scared of the outcome.
Yes, right.
Right? Yep. So the best performing organizations, the best performing people, they give, accept, and there's free flowing feedback based on trust.
Who gives you feedback?
I have some of the management team who are honest. So I do get the clients give feedback, right?
Clients always give
So here's
feedback,
the
whether
thing.
you ask for it or not.
Here's the thing about a member of staff in our industry. There's no point in them thinking they're good.
No.
You know, I always say to the team, I wonder how many Christmas dues you're going to get them invited on, because that's going to tell me. That's going to tell me how integral you are to how many businesses.
I wholeheartedly agree.
So the client always, but I've got people around me. I mean, my missus could have given feedback, by the way, but I do have people in the team who will be honest with me, which is not easy to someone like me. I'm aware of that.
And sorry to interrupt you. How do you know they are being honest? And by that I mean, again, let's be candid. Anyone in your business is subordinated to you.
Yeah.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
And it takes a very particular type of person to be able to sit down with the person who employs them and give them constructive feedback whereby perhaps there's a high risk they are not going to be elated with the constructive feedback that's being given. So how do you know that these people are giving you honest feedback versus telling you what you want to hear?
Well, I think when people are giving you an opinion that's different, their opinion, and it's remote or remotely opposite,
Yes.
or different to yours, then you understand that. Now, but you've also got to be self-aware as to how difficult it is for people to give
Totally.
you that. For me, we've got to not lose track of when you're in an organisation of what the objective is.
Right.
What's the goal? Does it make the boat go faster? That type scenario.
Mm-hmm.
If it makes the boat go faster, then we do it.
Yes.
So that is my mindset I try to get into, not perfect, when somebody's trying to give me an opinion that's the opposite of my own. It's where's that opinion coming from? Is that opinion coming from a point of it makes the boat go faster, Paul? Often, less so now, because we're getting close to what I think is a real high-performing organisation. But in the past, it would be things like, I need you to tell you this, Paul, and I need to let you know everybody thinks like that. And when I look at what they were actually telling me, it was best for them. A bit like work from home. Nobody wants to come back 1 day a week, Paul. And just so you know, nobody wants to come back 4 days in the office. And I think the person who's telling me that, do they want to make the boat go faster, or is it their agenda?
Totally right.
And so I think from that perspective, if you can set the objective in the organisation and you're clear in where you're going, as a leader, you have no choice then but to try and make every single decision in that does it make the boat go faster mentality. If somebody's going to give me honest feedback, bear in mind, I just said I ask for it every week from my staff, all of them. In fact, I demand it from them. Well, if I can demand that honest feedback every week and I'm willing to accept it and take it, do something with it, it sets a tone for the whole organisation to do the same.
Agree. Okay, just to move the conversation on slightly, because of course, Cedullo is your business, you are CEO, and of course, it's a business that you invest a huge amount of time and energy in. But of course, you have lots of other interests outside of the business. Could we just talk a little bit about the foundation, which I appreciate is part of the business, but actually you do it for very different reasons?
Yeah. So yeah, the foundation. I mean, we actually have 10 business in the group, in the finance group, and we have about 6 or 7 or 8 other things, investments, because I do see us in the end as a house of brands. And so we're constantly going to innovate and invest in other businesses, always. I see us as almost a Berkshire Hathaway in the future and not a mainstream financial advisory firm. So when you look at the foundation, it comes back to culture a little bit, belief system. I remember getting to, what am I now? My eldest son's 18, so we got to about 4, and I just thought, I'm starting to earn a bit of money back then, and I'm thinking I don't want him to not have, still have this issue today, by the way, with all my kids. You want them to have enough that they don't struggle, but you want them to have some kind of struggle. So anyway, long story short, I wanted him to understand at a relatively early age that he was quite fortunate. He got what he gets what generally is asked Father Christmas for at Christmas, and other kids don't. So long story short, I started back then just as, just to buy kids. For me and him, just went shopping and we bought presents for other kids. And that was just the start of it. Then the following year, we had about 8 staff. And I thought, why don't we just all do it as a team? So we all did it as a team. And then it just went and went and went. And last year we bought, us and our we facilitated 17,000 presents to kids in care.
It's incredible.
So it started from there. And then the foundation, we were getting bigger then. The activations were getting bigger. And in COVID, a school reached out to us and said, they're being asked to school from home here. The kids you're buying presents for, they don't have a pen and paper, let alone the stuff they're being asked to do. So we did a school campaign so they could homeschool. So I think we do about 1,500 kids a year where we give them home schooling equipment, but then it was the summer holidays. And they were like, is there anything you can do in the summer holidays for kids that aren't going to get school dinners? I was on school dinners. So I was like, yeah, we can. And then I decided we'd start buying Nando's vouchers. And the schools were like, why Nando's vouchers? And I'm like, because it's not just about the hot food. It's about being included in the conversation, right? So we started to work with JD. So they got a Nike or an Adidas or a Puma or something. Then they got a JD bag. So all of a sudden, their PE kit, instead of a Lidl bag or a supermarket carrier bag, became a JD bag. And then there was something in there, even if it was a water bottle that they could put on the desk with a Nike swoosh. So all of a sudden, there's an early buy-into with being in the conversation of Nando's. Anyway, long story short on the foundation, that then moved to the school saying, we have a real problem with girls in the school when they start the menstrual cycle. There's no product. And so they get picked on, and then they just have 1 week every month off. So we created a barcode in that every year where they scan the barcode and we send them period product for the rest of their educational life.
Wow.
And then we did hygiene for the boys because they don't have toothbrush and they don't have toothpaste and they don't have a renewal of deodorant and they don't have shampoo and hair conditioning. So they've got nicked and they're picked on again. So we created the same thing. So at this point, then the activations are becoming bigger and we set up the formal foundation. And because the people we act for, we're very fortunate. Like Emily Sunday is one of our private clients in London. She came down and performed for us last year. Gok Kwan is another one of our private clients. He comes down and performs. And then we're able to get quite a lot of sporting, high-profile people in the room. So we raised about $250,000 on each night that we've had the ball.
It's incredible.
And yeah, so that's the foundation. And it's a real buy-in for, again, you know, we're doing a good thing, but it's also great for the cultural side of the organisation that everybody can put as much or as little in as me or anyone else more, you know.
And obviously, Paul, I mean, that's like hugely inspiring. And thank you for setting up the foundation on behalf of the tens and tens of thousands of young people that the foundation has helped. Why? Why would a busy man who has no time, who's got his own wife and children, who probably don't see you enough, why would you create more busyness?
There's two reasons. I'll go with this one first because the other one will lead us to purpose in a second, which I think for any podcast or anything is vital. So the first part is because seeing what it was like growing up for me, I want to be able selflessly to provide better opportunities from people who maybe weren't as fortunate as I was. And I feel like I just stumbled across things, even being an accountant, I stumbled across stuff. I became luckier, if you like. It could have been a different podcast, this, right? So I am driven and committed to providing equal opportunity for kids. And the second part to that is the added fact is it's transformational when you work over Christmas and get 17,000 presents bespoke to kids, 1,500 kids, 10 to 12 presents each. And we have to really activate till 1, 2 in the morning almost as a family, our organisation. You do get spin-offs doing good. Yeah. From a selfish perspective, it's about purpose. Now, in reality, when you start hitting whatever you set out to do, 1 million turnover, you hit a bit like when you get a job. I wanted to earn 20 grand a year. When I was on 20 grand a year, I earned 25 grand a year.
You're trying to get the goalposts, right?
1 million became 2, 2 became 4, 4, 10. You realise as you're going through them, coming back to your question before, there's no sense of satisfaction. There's no sense of contentment. And you start thinking worriedly, what now? What next? What creates this level of satisfaction or contentment? Becomes, as I say, a quite bad anxiety, and I think a lot of it was fueled from that scenario or that kind of point of thinking. So I started to think, hold on a minute, there's going to become a point here where monetary things, turnovers, numbers, they're just never ever going to cut it. So what then? And I think I work with a lot of, as I said, of athletes, and what you get to see when you work with sports people is when they retire at 35 or 36, they almost have either the unfortunate or the fortunate viewing of what almost end of life is like. Because one life for them ends.
That's such, isn't it? Yeah.
It ends. Their notoriety, their earnings, their money, their validation, everything, their routine.
Their belief system.
Their belief system. Their whole purpose system is gone. And when you see how some people navigate that, positively and negatively, you realise that having a purpose is the single most important thing I think that exists. And if I come back then at the times where I was worried, I thought, I keep achieving all the numerical objectives are set, but it's not creating much satisfaction. I could sell my business today and never work again. It's not for sale, by the way, but if it was, I could never work again. So I could get out of that position of strive.
Yeah, for financial.
But then what would I do? Then what would I do? And it actually worried me.
Yeah.
And I decided I would already set up something that you could never actually achieve So I can never achieve an objective of creating global equality for kids
Why?
because there's too many. So if you do 1,000, then do 2,000. Once you've done 2,000, do 10,000. And the thing is it almost becomes an infinite purpose of helping kids. And so if something happened with Sayula where a transaction did happen, which is very, very, very unlikely, I've got something set up in the background. That's a forever purpose. If you look at Kevin Sinfield, who's a pal of mine, I remember interviewing Kev when he retired at rugby league, and he said, I don't want my purpose and my memories to be Kevin Sinfield, the rugby league hero. And then he went into coaching, and that wasn't ticking it either. And then obviously what happened with Rob Burrow was tragic, but he's managed to create good for that. But it's strange, if I'm in London now and I mention Kevin's name, most people don't even know he was a rugby league star, really, or they wouldn't know anything about him. They know him for his approach to combating MND and helping the MND community. So I think purpose is I see it in people when I interview sports stars. You get a real gauge by what their current behaviours are from how purposed they are post-retirement.
Do you think you will ever be content? And that's separate to purpose, isn't it? Do you think you'll ever just be at ease and just be content?
I'm not sure. I'm not as bothered as what I once was. Before, in the past, that, as I say, that question would have really worried me. Why are you not content? What are you doing it for? When are you going to slow down? Why can't you stop? And it's a bit of a drug, really. Mm-hmm. You know, Pete Cowgill at JD Sports, he was 69, I think, when he left JD, and it wasn't on his terms. No. It's a bit of a drug, and I'm a bit of an obsessive personality. So, again, I think one of the things in life is about being aware. And if I'm aware and I'm obsessive personality, because I look in the mirror and I'm honest with myself, which a lot of people find difficult to, but the sooner they get there, the better. I know I'm obsessive. Well, I can be obsessive about negative stuff as well as positive stuff.
That's right.
Right? So you see people fall off a cliff when they sell a business, time and time again, because they replace the drug of achievements with other
addictions.
Yes.
That's right.
And some of them are less positive. So I realise, being obsessive in my nature, I need to make sure I'm obsessed with channels where the outcome's positive.
That's right. And it's interesting because a lot of people believe that being obsessed with business equals positive, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. Because, of course, as you've just highlighted, you know, people found businesses, scale businesses, and are kicked out of their own business.
Yeah.
For good or bad reason.
Yeah.
Point being,
Yeah.
you need to make sure that your purpose extends beyond any company or any addiction you may have.
So it comes back then. So it comes to identity then. And this is a real interesting subject, because if you are a 85-year-old bloke and your time is up, I always think, what do you want on your headstone?
Yeah, that's right.
Right? If you want to put on there, let me make an example here. I'll go back to Kevin because that's an easy one, right? Because I know lots of people who would have their 32-year-old achievement on there. And what happens if you achieve it, if your headstone has got on it, former rugby league star? I'm going to make that up with Kev because we all know he's not,
sure.
right? He won't go down as that. I mean, actually, probably what he's going to go down as is his dad, husband. You look at tombstones, right? Occasionally, you might have someone that says former blah, 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 blah.
Very rarely, as you
Very
say.
rarely. And if you do, I wonder about that person. Because if they achieve their goal and their ultimate main purpose in life was achieved at 32, I'll guarantee you they lived miserably until they was 82, right? Because they was always looking back. And if you look back, it's a sign of being depressed anyway, because you're carrying things that are backward, memories and moments. So I always go, what's your identity? If your identity is attached to your sport or it's attached to your business, then you need to be aware of it and mitigating what that is, because it will not say on my tombstone, Paul Cheetham-Karcz, founder of the Sedulo Group, no matter how successful Sedulo Group becomes, right? So you have to then go, well, hold on, what am I doing it for? If it says good dad, good husband, good person, good friend, whatever it is that you want on there, you've got to get channeled in. That's the objective, though. That is the objective, right? So I've wrote my own eulogy on this basis. What do I want people to say about me? What's my memory? What's my legacy, right? And it starts with things that are personal to me. It doesn't say rich, it doesn't say made money, it doesn't say Sedulo's not in it. But it is a participator of me thinking what a good dad, a good husband, a good provider looks like, right?
But here's a question then. So the addiction you have for your business, do you think in proportionate terms you are as addicted to your family? And therefore you give your family more time than you do your business, because presumably we would both agree that our family is more important than our business. So are you as addicted to your family as you are your business in terms of who gets your time?
So I think I am addicted to my business, but my business is the vehicle and the facilitator of what I'm trying to do for my family.
Sure.
So the thing is about life, it's when you again speak to a sports athlete and you ask them about their career, they only ever remember the success they shared with people.
Yes, right.
Right. So if you ask a player what they miss the dressing room banter. They don't miss lifting a Premier League.
No.
They don't miss lifting a Champions League. They miss the banter. They miss the memories created with people in its form.
Yes.
In its basic form, they miss the memories created with people. You speak to the gold medalists at the Olympics. That's not their best event. That's not the event they remember the most. They remember the celebration afterwards. They remember hugging their husband or wife or coach, right, or physio in the stand. They remember what it meant to their physio or their coach that they were the person that picked up the gold, right? Because it's always about people in a team. That's right, whether it's a team or your family team, right? So with me, it's about memories. The reason why I took the risk to build a villa in Spain that I'd never seen before is because I wanted to create memories. It's not because I wanted a big house. It's not because I wanted all the things and trappings that materially come with that house. What I want one day is my kids to be in there with their kids saying, when dad was here, he used to do this. When mum was here, she used to cook that. This is our restaurant we used to go to as kids. So when you look at the obsession with Sedulo, it is an obsession because I've found a vehicle that provides me with my ultimate objective, which is creating and making memories with my family. And I couldn't do that without having the facilitator. And Sedulo is that. And when you then look at post my family, right, and you go, because we all have parent guilt, right? I meet very few.
What does that mean to you? Sorry, parent guilt.
I meet very few high performers that don't think, is this sacrifice morally correct to the family?
Yeah, missing the sports day or not being there for the first football game of your son. Yeah, totally okay, got it.
Right, so almost everybody I know has that. By the way, again, sport, if you go to the World Cup for 6 weeks in the summer, you don't go to the World Cup around your kid's birthday.
No.
If your kid's birthday is in June, and you happen to spend most of June on pre-season, right, you don't. That's how it is.
Sorry, sacrifice.
Sacrifice. But what you're sacrificing for, it always comes to the bigger purpose and the bigger objective. Whether that's your life goal and life objective, or it's your organisational goal or objective, which often in organisations isn't clearly defined. By the way, almost all the time, your personal objective is not clearly defined.
Correct.
Because I did a speech the other month in front of 400-ish people, and I said, hold up your hand if they're all owners of business, hold up your hand if you've written your mission, values, and objectives for your business.
For their business. Yes, yes.
Stand up. Stay stood if you've done the same thing for your life.
That's right.
Not one person. Not one person has sat and wrote, why am I doing this? And I think discontent comes when you don't know what you're doing it for.
Agree.
When you know what you're doing it for, then whatever the sacrifices are, you're willing to do in favour of reaching the objective. And if your objective is good dad, good husband, good man, is what you're doing today a step forward to getting you there? Now, if that's going to the World Cup for 6 weeks, if that's you spending 3 nights a week in London, you're spending 3 nights a week in London, is it for the goal? And I also think it's a good exercise to do with yourself because it stops you making the wrong decisions that most people make, which are driven by their ego, right? Me too. I've got an ego, and you have. And everybody else has got an ego to varying degrees. But how aware of it are you? Well, I'm aware of mine, and sometimes I have to rain check myself and go, hold on a minute, I wasn't doing this for the main objective. There's a big objective here, and you're doing this for other reasons, likes or validation.
It's interesting you used the word sacrifice before, and actually I use a different word because sacrifice is quite negative. It means you're giving something up, and people don't like giving something up. So actually for me it's investment, isn't it? So if I'm in London, I'm investing in my future because it takes me closer to my purpose. I'm not sacrificing time with my daughter. I'm investing in my purpose.
I like it.
I think psychologically
I agree.
it just leaves you on a better footing, but it's one in the same thing.
Agreed.
Paul, conscious of time, I've got a feeling we genuinely could sit here for another hour, but I have only, for this podcast, one last question.
Go.
So obviously you very honestly talked a little bit about, your very early years, when your mum perhaps was having a tough time with your biological father, and that just created instability. For anyone who's watching this podcast who is young, perhaps is in a similar set of circumstances, i.e. doesn't have stability, perhaps isn't being pointed in the right direction, but doesn't have the sort of willpower and the sort of clarity of thought that you had, what would you say to them if they know they don't like their life as it is, but they don't know how to change the direction of travel? What would you say to them?
I think a couple of things. I think the first thing is this, is that you've got to be self-aware, and I mentioned awareness quite a lot, and you've got to understand that you're not responsible, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're 40 listening to this or 50 or 50.
Yep.
You're not responsible for what happened to you in your early years, right? And it often shapes you. And you have actually got two ways in which it can shape you. It can destroy you, or it can be flipped and it can be the making of you. So you've got a choice. It's not your fault. A lot of people carry guilt with them, even for things that happened to them as a child, right? It's not their fault. It's not the child's fault. The belief system that they have has been formed at an early age, but that can be changed. In my eyes, should be changed. 46-year-old Paul should look at a view of life with different lenses than 4-year-old Paul.
Totally.
So that's why I think it should be changed. And then I think the thing is then is if you can flip it just in a way you just flipped, sacrifice to investment, creates a different behaviour pattern potentially. The one thing I'll say that's more important than everything else, if you might as well reach your potential. That means you've got to be welcome failure. Because if you don't push to potential, you're never going to fail, but you're never going to succeed either. You're just going to drift. And that wasn't the person I wanted to be working in a car mechanics garage. So let's push our potential. Why not? You're here once. You might as well see what you could have been. the chances of you meeting your potential after you've been self-aware, cut yourself some slack, realised it's not your fault, again, have the self-awareness to behave differently as an adult and view the same validations, the same traumas, the same insecurities that we're all born with, not born with, but we might be party to in our early years. You've got to be brave then and courageous and think, sod it. What's the worst that can happen? Society will bring you down, but it will anyway, because it wants to put you in your little box. Most of your mates want to put you in your box. Most of your friends will pretend they want you good for you, but they don't really when it comes to it. But the one thing, once you've been brave, the one thing that I think gives you the most chance to be successful beyond anything else is the level of consistency you show to meeting where you're trying to get.
I think if we had more time, I'd want to talk to you about compounding. I'd want to talk to you about marginal improvement, but sadly, our time is up. Paul, can I just genuinely say how enjoyable the conversation's been? I feel really inspired by some of the things you shared, as I'm sure will our viewers. But for now, Paul, huge thanks for appearing on my Confessions of a CEO podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have Paul Cheetham-Karcz on my Confessions of a CEO podcast today. It's been inspiring to find out a little bit more about how Paul's upbringing and indeed volatile childhood not only spurred him on to aspire to achieve perhaps more than he was able to enjoy as a child, but also it was fascinating to hear a little bit more about how Paul's lack of conformity and lack of willingness to fall in line and follow structure has created in Paul someone who strives for more, is never going to be content, and is unapologetic about that. Of course, founding Sedulo, a large national independent advisory business, is the business that Paul today is CEO of. But of course, as a man who has a beautiful wife, children, Sedulo has a business, along with many other business interests for sure. On a daily basis, he has to decide where to put his time. It was fascinating to understand a little bit more about how Paul goes about choosing to invest in things that take him toward his purpose, which is to be the best version of himself, to be the best father, best husband, best colleague, best CEO he can be. And therefore, as long as Paul's decisions take him toward his own personal purpose, then it's a decision he's comfortable with. It was really interesting to learn a bit more about how Paul deals with feedback and, of course, encourages not only people to receive it positively, but how he also will provide it, acknowledging to give feedback, you first of all have to demonstrate to the person you are giving feedback to that you love them, care for them, and have their best interests at heart. Otherwise, surprise, surprise, the feedback will be resisted. I think the final thing that I'll take from this podcast is Paul's absolute obsession and addiction with being the best version of Paul. I think a lot of people are striving, but perhaps aren't willing to be so verbally outspoken about their addiction with being the best sports person they can be, or the best father they can be, or the best businessman they can be. But why not? We get one life, and let's not ever strive for third place. You've been watching Confessions of a CEO, powered by RG. This podcast and all other podcasts in our Confessions of a series can be downloaded from wherever you download your podcasts. But for now, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and we look forward to seeing you on all future Confessions of a CEO podcasts.